Is this the one? Thanks everyone for showing up. I'm Bill Rash, Chair of the Wildlife Committee for the Maryland Farm Bureau Board. And first I'm going to introduce Bill Harvey, who is with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and he is going to be awarding the Farmer of the Year Award.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Bill Harvey with Maryland DNR, and I'm actually here representing the Wildlife Advisory Commission. And you may not know what the commission is, but it's a group of 9 people that are appointed by the governor to provide the department with guidance on all kinds of wildlife issues. And they, for many years, they've bestowed awards each year. And one of the 3 awards that they bestow, they call the Farmer of the Year. And the fact that they have identified the farmers through the Wildlife Commission is testament to the close link we all know exists between wildlife and agriculture, and especially hunting, and you're providing open places where you can hunt. So this year's winner came from Allegheny County. It's Sunset Orchard Farms, which I hope Mr. Ricci is here. Good. Okay, good. And the name, I guess, it started off as an orchard, but now it's more of a cattle operation. And it's a true family farm, judging from the application, 3 generations involved in working on the farm. The application highlighted the control of deer numbers through hunting by friends and family, providing habitat for a variety of small game and other wildlife species, rabbits and deer even, and use of trapping periodically to control coyotes and foxes on the area. So if you come up here, we've got a really nice plaque for you.
He actually was going to go to a different session. I had to lie. I told him this was going to be interesting, so you got to work it out.
I wasn't sure if it was a real secret or not, but we're fortunate. One of the guys we have on our staff is a really good artist, and so he does he does all this artwork, and so the plaque set is for the Maryland Wildlife Farmer of the Year in recognition of outstanding contributions toward the enhancement of wildlife management in the state of Maryland. Presented to Ian Ricci. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Ian. Good job. Next, I want to introduce Luke Macaulay, who is with the, as you see, Wildlife Management Specialist for University of Maryland. I believe most of your research are all at Y predominantly. Have been down there and have seen some of his work he's been doing. Luke really gets into his job down there. Does an excellent job. So Luke, all yours.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for coming, everybody. As Bill mentioned, so I'm a new wildlife management specialist. I'm new to Maryland, so learning a ton. I started about a year ago. So I've been hard at work, and these results are just hot off the press. I've been working on these I'm one of those people who can't find quiet time in the day, so I work like at night after the kids are in bed. I did all my analyses in the last few nights. So but I'm really excited to present them because they're brand new. There's a lot of work throughout the year gathering it all, and now we get to see what does this all mean. So we're looking at evaluating forage soybeans as a diversion crop for deer. So I came into the position, and several of the farmers had been trying to plant forage soybeans as a buffer around crops and keep deer out of the main best part of the fields. So I've picked up on it and started learning more about it myself. So let's dig in. So outline, we'll start and go through an introduction and the problem. Imagine a lot of you guys might have a pretty good sense of the problem. talk about the methods, results, and next steps. So the last time a survey was conducted by the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service was 2012, and they found deer account for about 77% of the $10 million in economic losses to agriculture every year. A lot of people say, well, that's probably a real underestimate. So as at the end, I'm going to bring you guys, if you have a chance, we're going to be working on a survey to potentially try and get better numbers at that. So I will hand this out to you guys at the end. But to try and better understand this damage issue, but it certainly is an issue. And this is what many of you might see if you have yield monitors on your combines. You see any place where you have woods and cover, deer like to move in from there and into your crops. And while you might see it visually by your eye, this first 10, 20 feet, when I'm walking out in the field, I say, okay, I can see the shorter stature. You don't realize that this yellow, this large swath, about 100 feet, 200 feet into there, is also getting hit. Here's another example from John Bruning's farm, and you can see this. This is like his deer mecca, like they just keep coming to this spot. So he showed me this, and we got some aerial imagery of that, but just complete loss of crops in these places. Here's another picture of an exclosure. We just have wire. 4-foot wire, and it keeps the deer out, and you can see what the soybeans could do in that spot, but aren't. And we have camera traps out, and we get lots of pictures like this where the deer sort of just loses forage soybeans. It just gets sucked up in his mouth like that. So the problem John mentioned when we were talking, it really struck home for me. He said, other than rainfall, deer are the largest single yield limiting factor on our farm. I think that applies to a lot of folks, especially if you have forests and cover and things like that. So when you put it in that context, it's like, wow, that's a pretty big deal. So what are forage soybeans? I got this question a few weeks ago. I was like, I should figure this out. What is the history of forage soybeans? Well, North Carolina Soybean Producers Association describes this. In the 1870s, farmers first began getting soybeans onto the North America, and they started planting them as forage for livestock. That was their predominant use. And up around 1900, USDA started testing forage soybeans, encouraging planting for animal feed. So it was always a forage crop. And that forage use was the predominant use until World War II, when production shifted to soybean meal to feed animals in feedlot situations. So, and then fast forward 40 years past, in the 1990s, USDA in Maryland did some more research and released 3 varieties of forage soybeans. I'm sorry, I'm in the way, guys. I'll try and move around so each of you guys can see the screen. But 3 varieties were released in the 1990s. So, sure, yeah, you want to? You just hit the right button right there. Yeah. So the goals of the study is evaluate 2 aspects. One is, what are the deer preferences for different soybean varieties, forage varieties and conventional? Do they work better? And the other is to see how do the plants themselves respond to the grazing. Go ahead and advance it. And I got to start. I'm going to put this slide in here twice. That was my last minute edit, because I really have to thank all these people on this list, especially the farm guys at the Y. I grew up in Texas. I didn't grow up around soybeans. I don't know anything about them. I'm not an agronomy major, so I'm like a crash course in agronomy. So I got to thank John Draper, Tommy Easton, Joe Street. They all took me under their wing this first year, teaching me what needed to be done, planting the crops, taking care of everything. Taylor Robinson's my assistant. Lewis Thorne, Joe Crank, CJ, they did a great job implementing a lot of the field work. We have a couple of collaborating farmers, Jim Lewis, ag agent, and co-PIs Jim Lewis and Nicole Fiorellino. They've given me good advice throughout this process. So go ahead. And of course, this project is sponsored by Maryland Soybean Board. And thank them for the funding. So field selection, we had 2 fields with a lot of deer damage issues. Here are the yield maps of the field we'll call E5. You might see that through there. It doesn't mean anything to you, but this is long, narrow field surrounded on 3 sides by woods, and we have C8, C9. You'll see that number around. That's this field where you have 2 sides and we have a lot of damage. So we decided to, there'd been some work done, but it was really on one variety. There wasn't really great data collection. So we were trying to come back. I wanted to just get a better foundational understanding of what's going on. Let's run a basic variety trial. I was able to find 4 varieties of forage soybeans. One of the requirements is that they were glyphosate tolerant. So they would actually work in at least some standard conventional soybean production aspects. The others that have been released, mentioned earlier, are not glyphosate tolerant. So wanted to make sure we tried ones that would work in a production scene. And we also included 3 conventional soybeans as well. And we put them in randomized complete block design, as you see here. Maybe click one more. Yeah, and here's the other one, where we had 5 replicates of this in this field and 3 replicates in this. We used cameras. Only put out 10 cameras. I wasn't sure how well they were going to work, but they seem to be working pretty good, and we'll see some results from them. So, and we had them on each of these varieties to basically see what's the activity on that variety in that spot. Go ahead. And we get lots of pictures of these. And I put this picture in here because these antlers require a heck of a lot of protein to grow, and soybeans are great for so many reasons because they have high protein. They have high protein in the beans as well as in the leaves. I've read 18, 20% around there. So very high protein forage and good quality, very digestible, and they love it. So, and these guys are chomping away on our field. Go ahead. So on the methods, so that's the design. I want to go through with different types of data we collected. We got drone imagery, we got drone pilots license here, and Taylor and I will fly these different fields every month or so to basically just document what's going on through the growing season. And it's actually pretty interesting to go from July 14th, July 20th, it's very fast green up. And we have large bare areas in here, but then by the end of the season, there's a lot of recovery and a lot of those gaps have been filled in. Soybeans have an incredible ability to do compensatory growth, to branch out and regrow despite some of the damage they sustain, as you can see. Go ahead. Here's C8 and C9, that square field. You can see a couple of pictures here. Go ahead. And we got a couple of images from our cooperating farmers. This is one of Jim Lewis's farms, and he ran a 20-foot buffer around this field. And as you can see, it's completely bare. There are small soybean plants just barely hanging on in there. But Jimmy has said, he described himself as the best among the best penny pinchers in the world. And but he said he would do this again in a heartbeat because he says it's hard to measure. I can't give you the quantification right now, but I tell you, my damage I can tell is way better having put this in. I'll do two strips next year. I'll do 40-foot wide buffers. I think that would do better. So this is Joe Street's farm in Delaware, and I have this red circle here. Those of you who have good eyesight, young people in the crowd, you can probably pick out that little green dot there. Just want to point that out. That is one of these exclosures we've got. So this is the drone mapping. Click the next site. It's about a 35-acre field, and here's a close-up of what the deer are doing in his field. So he's got a real extreme deer damage situation. He's counted 70 deer at a single time in his soybean field. So just to illustrate some of the data we were gathering there. And here's a picture of that one. We clip biomass to see, what's the difference in weight inside and outside. Go ahead next. And of course, harvest. We all really want to, at the end of the day, what's the yield? What's the yield of these things? So we went through and used every 20 feet would gather information so we could create a heat map of the yield maps that we've got. And there's Taylor in the field. It's all right, gathering information for us. So here's the analysis. I've got 4 main topics we'll cover real quick. So go through the biomass data, the camera trap data, which I thought was pretty cool, yield, and then just a case study of the economics for Joe Street's farm and what this means. And again, it kind of feeds into this survey that we'd like to gather and see if we can get better information on economic losses to this. And I say all this, I like deer. I'm a deer hunter. I think a lot of us are, but it's also at a certain point, there's tools that need to be made available for running an enterprise. So, and ways to do it, mixed use, right? To be able to run both of these things at the same time. So here are the biomass data. And so the red, this is weight on the height is the weight. So the higher bars mean there's more plant mass in those exclosures or outside of them. The red bars are exclosures. We get those fences. So that's stuff that's growing without deer grazing. And the blue is outside. So the funny thing, many of you might just look at this thing. There's a lot of blue bars that are higher than the red bars. We were clipping and we're like, this doesn't look right, guys, because these plants are way bigger outside than inside. What's going on? So there could be a lot, there could be a few things. I think one of the aspects is that there's this compensatory growth. When the deer bite that soybean plant, they branch out, they actually produce more biomass based on what we're finding. Now, there could be other things driving it. There are sort of exclosure effects. Some other things could be happening. Rabbits love the exclosures we found out this year. They can get in there and have protection from the foxes and everything else. So they just hide out inside the exclosures and eat everything else. So we had about 19 exclosures, but pretty much wasted. But I think even in ones that I know we didn't have rabbit grazing in, there was still higher biomass outside than inside. I was like, huh, this is interesting. So go ahead. Now I say that that's in at the Y, where I think we recently came off of a bit of an EHD, a die-off, or our deer populations densities weren't as high as they've been in the past. People were commenting that, yeah, the soybeans are growing really well this year. And it's my first year there, so I'm still learning. But here on the left is the Y, and to the right of this black line is Joe Street's farm. So you have moderate deer grazing, and you have a lot of this pretty even biomass situation, and you get into extreme deer grazing, and you get really obvious differences in biomass inside versus outside. And he had complete losses in this backfield where it was just, there's a 3-acre field surrounded by 1,000 acres of wood. So what do you expect? Okay. So deer activity and grazing. So we got those cameras out there because we want to make sure, see how much time they're actually spending on the soybeans to control for that aspect. Maybe one soybean's drawing them all in, and because of that, they're not going to the others. But let's see what we found. So we got grazing. We also have a little bit of other activity going on in your soybeans. They're making trails. They're maybe scuffling, maybe finding a date in the middle of your soybean field. So go ahead, next slide. And you also have things besides deer that I mentioned earlier. So these little dead spots are those exclosures where we now next year we will be putting in 1-inch mesh fencing around the bottom as well. But they definitely ran their issue as well. And so sometimes it might not just be deer that's causing some of this. So just want to highlight that for all of us as well. So here's a chart showing the number of pictures of deer, and this is presence. And I put that in bold because it's not grazing, it's just presence, because so many pictures of deer just walking by. Like, well, we want to know, are they actually eating the forage soybeans? So these are all the different colors of the different varieties we had. And this is the time on the x-axis. So June, July, August. And you can see after August, those beans start to senesce. August 1st really is the mark here. Deer hardly were in there at all. And let's go ahead and advance to the next one. This is photos of deer grazing by variety. So there's fewer numbers of photos, more of these spikes. Then this is across all those cameras sort of combined. Go ahead to the next one. Similar graph again. We broke this out between the two replicates. So we had those these randomized designs. So basically, statistically, we're not messing anything up. But here's one set of 5 of the varieties. Here's the other set of 5 varieties. And it basically helps to account for certain problems. Like in this first one, we know that this yellow is the first one on the edge of the field in the woods. So we have this sort of, we can kind of account for and understand what's going on in that one. But that was the biologic forage soybean was really getting hammered early on, and not as much when you got into the middle of the field. So this is again deer presence. Go ahead and we'll look at the one with deer grazing. Similar pattern. You see these big spikes, and I actually don't see. There's a couple of little patterns here, and statistical analysis we'll be working on shortly in the next few months. So I haven't tested these for statistical significance, but a couple of things I saw that I'd like to point out. We saw that biologic is really heavily used early on, this yellow bar here. It's not so much in this one. Big Fellow, which I thought was going to be the most preferred variety because I saw these stems just eaten off. I was like, gosh, they really like Big Fellow. They didn't really get into that until later in the season, after July 1st. Now that's a group 7 forage soybean. So there might be something in there in the phenology of the plant where they really start keying in on it later in the season as these later groups. And that actually is a pattern that I think is following in a few of these other varieties as well. Briar Ridge is an earlier variety and it gets hit a little bit more early on and tails off a little bit towards the end. Pioneer 3.1 is a little bit more in the early, whereas the 5.3 seem to get a little bit more, tend to fall more on the right. This purple tends to be even more on the right. So these are just some patterns I'm seeing. Again, statistics will maybe help shake this out. Maybe there'll be a significant difference, maybe not. There's a lot of noise to deal with. But this is a couple other things. Let's go back. Just one more thing I want to say about this is look at these spikes. I've noticed, I was pretty shocked, like a lot of this grazing just gets hit. If you took 5 days out of this, you'd probably reduce your damage by half, maybe. Just in a few short days, they do an incredible amount of damage. And I'll see it in these pictures where they'll just be milling around and then they'll be gone for 3 days, 5 days, a week. And that 1 hour of grazing can do a whole lot of damage. So just another thing just to think about and understand the patterns of what's happening. Yield, what everybody wants to know about. So here's our yield. Put together yeah, that's it. A yield map, and this is that square field, and this is the only one I've done so far. But that's the closest edge to the woods, and this is kind of moving away from the woods. Hold some of these red dots with caution. We had the exclosures in there, so we have like big chunks being pulled out of that. So that's part of it. But you do see these patterns of these sort of darker bars, and those are the varieties. That's the Big Fellow variety, which turned out to be not very productive in terms of yield. Go ahead. And here's the layout of what that looks like in that field sort of turned around. Go ahead. This is basically the yield maps, that sort of yield map based on these 5 different varieties here. And as you move, each different color is a variety. As you move across the field, this is 20-foot increments that we're getting yield numbers for. There's multiple lines here. Remember, we had 3 replicates. So just to show the sort of noise and the differences you see in the plots as you move across the field. So closest to the woods is over here. And as you move to the right in each of these plots, you get further out into the middle of the field. And you see a general trend of increasing yields as you get out further into the field. And you can also see all the noise in here and just the natural variation that happens. These black dots are our exclosures. What good? It's very challenging because we see that these exclosures are not revealing a whole lot of improved yield. So how much of this issue, and this is where this topic is really complicated, is disentangling all the different variables you deal with in agriculture. You have soil differences, you have rainfall differences, you have deer differences, the populations skyrocket, then they crash. But these dots are the yield and exclosures where they're protected from deer grazing, and these did not have rabbits grazing inside. So there's some of this could be a field effect is what I'm saying. There's roots, there's competition, there's shading, and other things like that. So I would have loved to have seen a little bit more pronounced effect from deer grazing, and but we're going to keep looking at this and get a better handle on it next. Similar graph for the other field, that long field. We had an extra couple of varieties, we had more space, so we ran a couple more varieties. A couple of highlights. I generally will see there's a couple of low varieties. A Big Fellow, which I thought was going to be like the bean to get because it was getting chewed on a lot. It was really healthy looking. Their yields were down across the board. This forage variety here, GT1 Briar Ridge, it tended to have pretty good yields. It was actually matching or exceeding the Pioneer conventional breeds that we had, varieties we had. This is a 7.2 variety, group 7.2, that did pretty well. But that Big Fellow on the left and this one right here, which is also a lot of Big Fellow, didn't do as good as we thought. So that was new to me. I was interested to find that out. And these dots did show a little bit more of an effect, especially with this Briar Ridge, where you saw better yields in that field in the exclosure. So this is the one I pulled out. All the ones with rabbit grazing, I yanked out of there and dropped them. So we had limited data in these black dots as well. So And then we'll do a little bit of the economics and wrap us up. Go ahead, next slide. Here's Joe Street's farm that I showed us earlier with that little spot of that exclosure. We had 5 exclosures here. Go ahead and click the next spot. And again, this helps us to sort of think about what is the economic value, and getting back to the larger issue is of how to quantify damage, what to do about it, what's the value here. So he had a 33-acre farm. His yield on this whole farm this year, when they got the receipts back, was 581 bushels for this 33 acres. That got us a yield of 17.2 bushels per acre. That's kind of rough. In our exclosures, we had these little exclosures in 5 circles right here around the edge. And these are kind of marginal areas of the field, right? You got a lot of shading, you probably have root competition with the trees. Their average yield in those 5 was 51 bushels per acre. The price per bushel at $12.50 right now, that's a spot price today. He would have come out if he sold all his beans that he got off there, it's for $7,200. If he had gotten what he got in these exclosures in these more marginal areas, he would have gotten 21,000. So it's a 66% loss for yield and income on that. So it's pretty substantial, huh? So I want to just put those numbers down for us to just better quantify and understand what we're talking about, because I think sometimes it's not as clear. And granted, Joe is in a extreme deer damage scenario. He's surrounded by 1,000 acres of woods. He seems to this year, though, have drawn in all the deer from the neighborhood. So none of his neighbors got nearly as much damage. They seem to move in and just stayed here and haven't left. So he might have actually just sacrificed for all of his neighbors. So there's this sort of like competition about who can plant last their soybeans, because they don't want the deer coming and getting them first. Like, somebody else plant first, so I don't have to do it. Go ahead. So go ahead, next one. So conclusions. So the biomass aspect of this, in moderate deer grazing, it seems like in a lot of cases, it increased the biomass, that compensatory growth. Obviously, when it gets to more extreme deer damage, we have bigger impacts. Go ahead and click next. The deer activity and variety preferences, there was a big spatial component. I mean, like, they like those areas by the woods. That's a big driver. But there's some initial evidence of shifting preferences for varieties based on maturity date, where we saw like they seem to be picking up on different varieties later on. And it did seem as though those big spikes where we saw like in those 5 days, there's just like a lot of damage was implemented. Go ahead, next. And here's that picture of those where you have these big spikes and that stuff. And then yield. Statistical analysis will come forward, and we'll see if we can get see if these are significant differences. Very difficult to disentangle all these different field differences, especially in moderate deer grazing, to really get a handle on what's driving it. But it does seem as though we have some forage varieties that are performing better than others, and even offering better yields than conventional. A lot of them lodged over. I don't know if that's a problem for some people's combines. Ours was able to get really close to the ground and scoop them all up. So that's promising. You could actually potentially, some of these forage soybeans also were much more affordable than others. So that's oftentimes been a holdup for some people. It was $90 a bag forage soybeans for some of these glyphosate resistant ones, but I was able to find a couple other varieties that were around $50 a bag. So closer to the sort of mainstream pricing for these. Go ahead, next. So thanks again to all the collaborators, John Draper, Tommy Eason. They make this look easy. I tried to grow some soybeans in my backyard. I realized it's way harder than it looks. I'm not a farmer. These guys take care of me. Taylor, Joe, Lewis, Jim, Nicole, thank you all. And thanks also for Maryland Soybean Board. Here's my email address right here. If you have any questions, go ahead next. Next steps, I'd like to, go ahead, click it. Implement this more in a context of field buffers. The whole idea of this is see whether buffers work. So we need to get more places and get places with good history of yield data where we can try this and see, do we actually see a response? Again, very hard because you have these moving deer populations, moving weather, but we're going to continue this effort and learn more. Learned a ton this first year, so it's been great. Next, evaluate. We have a project going in the ground right now to evaluate the efficacy of planting into green cover crops to see. A lot of the damage I found was plant death at the cotyledon stage of those first 2 leaves. the deer chomps below that cotyledon, it kills the plant. If it can get that first trifoliate off, they can nip that off and the plant will recover quite well. So I'm wondering how much those first few weeks, if we can plant into green cover crops, if they can get past that stage, just grow up a little bit more, whether we'll start to see a significant effect from that. Next. And then also this survey I've been alluding to a couple of times here in the talk is to, we're going to do a survey to better quantify damage, but also landowner needs, interests. What would you like to learn more about? Recreational aspects, the positive side of wildlife as well. And I'm going to hand a bunch of these out. There's a QR code. If you take your phone and put on the photo app, it'll just hold it on there. It'll pop up a little link and you click it and it'll take you to the survey. It's a draft survey. So we're just gathering information. It's not going to be used for research purposes, just to tell us whether this question is dumb. Are we missing something? Something doesn't make sense. It would be a great help for us to make sure we're addressing what you're interested in learning about. Next. And here's that QR code that I'll hand out as well if you just want, anyone wants to do this on their phone right now. But actually, let me hand out a few of these you can grab. And feel free to take it if you have time. It'd be helpful for us. Once you put it out there, you can't change it. So I'll give you the big stack. Thank you. And then the next QR code here is feedback. What did you like of this talk? What would you like more of? Would you like less of? Feedback, how did I do? All that stuff. And again, you can just take your phone, actually just take a picture of that screen. It'll take you to a survey for evaluation for this talk. And if you have any questions, again, my email is lukemac@umd.edu. I have a few paper copies if you don't want to do the QR code online thing and you want to give feedback this way too. Be great help. Thank you all very much. Yeah.
Those yield rates that you had there.
Yeah.
Did you plant the entire field with those varieties?
We planted these strips.
I understand, or you did the buffer on the one part.
Yeah.
Okay, then the other farm-
The economic one.
Right.
This, so for the economic, this one you're talking about, or
The one that, does that one have the buffer around it?
this one does not? We tried a whole field planting of a late variety
Okay,
soybean.
now that variety that was planted there, is that one of those 5 varieties that you?
It is one of the, yes, it is one of the varieties that we tried. It was a 7.2. We were trying a 7.2 conventional variety there.
Okay, so it is a 4-H variety that you planted.
It was actually conventional. The idea was that maybe a later group might work, a later group conventional might act like a forage soybean. So we tried to actually plant the whole field in a later group conventional bean. It was I think this is the 5.3.
Then
It-
your next research, you're gonna plant 4-H buffer and then plant conventional.
Yeah.
on the inside.
Yeah, and
Have
that's
you done any of it with corn or vegetables or anything? I mean, I'm
not,
okay.
no, not, well, actually, yeah, this Jimmy Lewis's farm was with corn. And he thought he had really improved, and he planted in a couple of his fields as buffers. And anecdotally, he said, this is his cornfield right here, where it was completely sort of eaten around. And I want to run the statistics and see, I would like to he's got yield data from a few years back from 16, 17. I'd like to actually compare these as we continue to look at this to see, okay, what was his yields in the past when he had corn with and without this? He's got irrigation, so that helps to control for the weather. So that's where we've tried some of that. But it's been very hard to unpack all this. And Jimmy says, he's like, this is gonna be one of those projects you're not gonna be able to quantify it. And I'm gonna do my best to try and quantify it. But he's like, but I can tell you, looking at this is working for me. So I think with all farmers, and people have very unique situations, like for some people, fencing might be an option, for electric fencing, depending on what you have available. If you have cheap labor and you have somebody who can drive an ATV and check electric fences every day, that could work for you, and then fix them when they get torn up. If you have just so many different situations that can arise, that works well for different types of situations. So
Yeah, ammo is daggone expensive. You can't buy it anymore.
what gets expensive?
Ammo.
Oh, ammunition, right? Yeah. Oh, you just can't even find it, right? Yeah. Start reloading. Yeah.
Excluded area near the house where the feet look like they're more vegetated roads. See how much, still how much effect there is out in the middle of the field.
Like right around in here. We didn't have any exclosures here. So he was estimating, he thought they got 70 bushels acres up there. I don't know how if that was sort of eyeballing or if he just cut a few plants and estimated by the plants, but that's what he was thinking. So yeah, it could have been even, that was a low estimate from that economic value of 50, and those were in those marginal exclosures. So 30, 33 acres, I think. Yeah.
Wind, not just rain weather, but wind weather
Hmm.
and moon phases. They do different things in different moons.
Yeah, 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 and the drying out of wind and other things. Yeah,
When it's really windy, you don't know.
right. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, but I've certainly learned a lot in this first year. Oh, Danielle, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some comments from the soybean board's perspective. So the Maryland Soybean Board has been funding research on forage soybeans for the past 3 years. We were very excited to have Luke come on board this year. He has some really good ideas to move this project forward. But what we've seen over the past few years is that our farmers who have participated in the on-farm trials have been very pleased with the results. We had a few farmers this year who actually planted the soybeans at their own expense. Most of those were group 7 soybeans, so a lot of them actually didn't even go back to harvest those beans. But what they have found in their experience is that the yield gains that they are getting in the center of the field helps make up for that yield loss. The yield loss that they might get from not harvesting those 7s around the perimeter of the field.
Yeah, so another thing that we wanted to try some of these varieties is because the previous forage soybeans that we used were group 7s, and we were able to find some group 4.7, some group 5.5, some group 6s, and those did pretty well, the group 4.7, and those matured in time, I think would be fine for an early frost even. I think they would be senesced enough before really a risk of frost. I think those 7s, they didn't yield well even without frost, but I think those GT7s, which were here, I'm curious, I was hopeful that those would be really good. I didn't think they were actually going to be good. And then the yield results came out and they were pretty good. So again, too early. Don't go spend a lot of money on any of this because it's just too early and there's a lot of noise in the data, but that's this green one. It turned out pretty good. These are group 5.3. So later groups were doing better. And I don't know enough about forage soybeans in general, but my sense is that there's been a move towards earlier maturing varieties, but it seemed like this is the 3.1s. Here's the group 5.3s. Similar, but you had a little bit bigger spikes. On average, I think this one probably came out the best in that field. And then we have let me see here again, the 5.3s. This is just conventional 5.3s did really well here. Group conventional 7.2s. That's what we planted in Joe Street's farm. And those GT1 forage soybeans right there did pretty well too. So I'd say those are kind of the biologic did okay. But the forage soybeans that we thought, the big fellows from Eagle Seed, we thought they would do really good, but they seem to be preferred more later in the season. So and those are group 7s. Yeah, Bill.
If I can elaborate a little bit on what the wildlife committee and we saw when we were down at the Y, the exclosures, and as Luke said about the rabbits, it seemed like they really attacked one or more varieties a little bit more than the other ones. But there was one variety in there that they had pretty well cleaned off. But it was very evident of how much regrowth you were getting out of those forage beans in comparison to what the conventional beans were doing. And then when you compared this plot with a year or two ago when we were down there, may have been with the field crop committee, they had those enclosures in just conventional beans, and you didn't find hardly any beans at all. That the beans that were in the closures were, full height and looking really good. But there was a huge difference between that and what the forage beans. The forage beans were actually showing a lot of regrowth. So.
I'm actually interested in really hoping our deer like we have a deer hunting program to help manage deer crop damage and things like this, but I'm hoping that we actually have more of a deer problem next year so that we can maybe get a bigger effect, at least at the research farm. So, but any, we do, I am interested in working with farmers. So if anybody has a field they'd like to try this on, put a buffer, try an edge, something like that, contact me soon. Contact me in the next few months here. You got my email, and we can chat about putting something in, getting another data point. We're at 4:45.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments for Luke? Luke, thank you for your presentation. Great. Appreciate it. While we're here, does anyone have any questions for Bill for DNR? He's- All right. Yeah, you're right. Well, thanks for coming. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Appreciate it.